Welcome to Reduce Your Stress with Tim Ringgold. I'm a board-certified music therapist, author, and expert on how to use music to relieve stress fast. This episode of Reduce Your Stress with Tim Ringgold is sponsored by Dr. Nisi, trainer and certifier of master and executive coaches, because she believes every person, every relationship, every business, and your finances should be extraordinary. Find out more about Dr. Nisi Moore and the Life Coaching Institute at www.drnisi.com. That's DRNEECIE.com. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Reduce Your Stress with Tim Ringgold. It's so great to be with you, and I'm so glad you're here. In this episode, I have the pleasure of interviewing David Sonnenschein about the intersection of sound, music, games, learning, and healing. David is a sound designer, filmmaker, game developer, musician, sound healer, audio consultant, and author of the international textbook Sound Design, The Expressive Power of Music, Voice, and Sound Effects in Cinema. He's currently CEO of the edtech company iQsonics, which is based in Santa Monica, California, creating services and products that utilize music and audio for brain health. Their flagship program is called Sing and Speak for Kids, which you'll hear more about. It's a music-based game for supporting language development in early childhood education for the autism population and English language learners, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Education Small Business Innovative Research. David has a BA in Neuroscience and Music from UCSD and an MFA in Cinema and TV from USC. We trace his journey from music student to music healer and learn some powerful things about why music and sound are so important for our mood management. So sit back, relax, and I'll see you on the other side. David Sonnenschein, thanks so much for joining me on Reduce Your Stress.
Oh, it's going to be fun. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember who was the first person who introduced us, because I feel like there was an email thread prior to Metal.
Yes. Well, I think it was within Metal, and you hooked me up with Mary.
Yes.
Mary Palafax. And
that did happen.
So that was after Metal. And I've been in for maybe 2-3 months. And I think it was through Metal that I heard about your work. And
gotcha.
There may have been a previous one, but we really connected in Metal.
I remember we had an original kind of, we met together like this, and just shared like what we were up to and all the similarities. And it was like, oh my gosh, holy cow, this is great. We need to dive down the rabbit hole together. So here we are.
Yeah, and we get together breathing almost every day. That's a really cool thing to share.
That's right. So for the listeners, David and I do Wim Hof breathing every weekday morning as a part of a group. A bunch of us log on to Zoom together and basically breathe together for about a half hour. And if you aren't familiar with Wim Hof or Wim Hof breathing, you should go Google it. It's a super healthy practice for you, and I highly recommend it. And so that's where we see each other's face first thing in the morning every day, and then we both split off into our respective missions involving music. So, for the audience, kind of tell me, if we trace it all the way back to your, where or how old were you when you first were introduced, when you first met music?
Well, I was introduced officially to play music by my mom. And the first thing that I think came out of me was old McDonald's had a farm, and she recounted to me that I would go E-I, 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 E-I all day long. And it evolved to a little more sophistication when she said, how would you like to play the clarinet? And I didn't know anything about the clarinet, but she didn't want a squeaky violin or really loud trumpet. So she selected the clarinet. And I said, okay, let's do it. And I really got into it immediately. And at a very young age, I mean, within like a couple of years, I was playing Flight of the Bumblebee.
Wow.
So I was like,
you were really into it.
Going and Dave Brubrecht's Take 5.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was doing that within 2 years of playing clarinet.
Is this like elementary school? What?
Yeah.
Kinda...
Elementary started, it was like, I guess third grade. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
That's like, And by the time I was, in high school, I was in 3 symphony orchestras. I was really serious about it. I was taking private lessons with David Atkins, who's an amazing clarinetist, and really, really just enjoyed it. It was just a big part of my life, and still is.
Nice. Do you still play your clarinet?
Absolutely, in a very similar and different ways. I'm still playing some of the same pieces I played back then, in particular Bach solos.
Okay.
Originally written for violin and cello, and you can hear Yo-Yo Ma play these, and it's so cool. And you can hear classical guitarists play these, and they're very well known, and I know them very well because I've been playing them for 60 years. And I decided in the last few months to start recording myself playing them. But at this stage in my life, I'm doing variations on Bach. It's the Sonnenschein variations.
I love it. I love it. The Sonnenschein variations. That's really what it is, right? You stick your last name on it, and
yeah. And it's I think that Bach has influenced so much of what music is even today. And one of the things is a kind of a tangent here is there's a game I've been developing about classical music's intertwining of influencers throughout mainly the 200 years of since Bach up till late 1900s. Early 20th century, and these guys, and there are a few women, but mostly guys, influence each other like rock bands do, and you can track that kind of history and influence. So anyway, it's a game that I'm now seeing myself engaged with in 2021 here with. My own versions. And it includes my influence from Artie Shaw, who is a jazz clarinetist from 40s and 50s. And he was influenced by klezmer. And so there's this whole thread of things that are happening, and I'm documenting it by actually just performing and creating new sounds. And I'm also a sound designer, as you may know. I wrote a book on sound design for film and games. So I use sound in many more ways than just traditional music, considered whether it's classical or jazz or klezmer. This is sound that includes music and everything else that's sound. So that's that's what I'm mixing my variations with some other sounds.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, we'll get to that. I'll be picking your brain more about that here shortly. I'm curious because of all the pressure, what are you going to be when you grow up? And if you're good at something in high school, is that what you're going to do as a career? Did you feel either the pull or push to become a professional musician? And what was that like? And what age was that really like most oppressive?
I think it was high school where I had to make a decision to go pro or not. I was good enough, but at the same time, it's a little different being a clarinetist than a violinist, because you can go pro and be like one of 20 violins, but if you go pro, you got to be one of 2 clarinetists. And so the competition's a lot stronger.
Interesting.
And I played in orchestras where there was competition both for the orchestra and also for myself getting the position in it. And I didn't like the competitive part of it, honestly. So my other attraction, and still is attraction, is science. And so when I went to college, I decided to major in neuroscience and minor in music. So I kept them both going. And that's another whole trajectory that's led me to what I'm doing today as well.
Totally. And as a neuroscience informed music therapist, I completely think what a perfect combination, in my biased opinion, of a major and a minor, because the overlap is so cool, using one to study the other and vice versa. But what was the timeline? Like, what decade was that when you were doing
early 70s? And I just have to say something that just came to me now when you said about my major and minor, which is exactly what they're called when you're in college.
Right.
I was listening from you as a musician and listening to the major chords and the minor chords of my education. So I appreciate that little revelation just at this moment. So we'll riff on that a little bit as it evolves. I went to UC San Diego, and early 70s, it was a very, and still is a very science-oriented school, lots of Nobel laureates. It's really up there. And I also had a background in having my father be a physiologist at UCLA Medical School. So I grew up with research science and universities and all that. And it attracted me, but I ended up discovering that academia at that point in my life was not attractive enough. And I took off after this portion, but to focus on what brought me to this, there was parallel paths. I continued as a clarinetist, playing in chamber music and studying also some really interesting other kind of music. Like Pauline Oliveira is passed away now, but she was one of the main forces for half a century in new music. And she was one of my professors there too. So I was exposed to, like, other than the classical, serious composition, but, John Cage kind of stuff, and electronic. And this is early 70s. So we're talking some really avant-garde kind of things that now are, a lot of it's mainstream, but a lot of really interesting stuff opening for me there. And meanwhile,
Can I stop you really quickly? Because to the average music listener, they probably haven't been introduced or exposed to any or too much new music, and what new music means in the context that you're describing. So they might be, oh, is that like the latest release from, Ye, who used to go by Kanye until a week ago? But it's no, new music is actually like a style. And I wasn't exposed to it at all, having been a lifelong musician, a professional musician, until I went back to school to a classical conservatory. That's where I was introduced to, what is this? Oh, this is new music. No, this is not. This is no music. What are you talking about? It's a whole new world of music. So can you briefly kind of talk about that?
Yeah, it's several pieces come in. One is that John Cage really created, I think, the foundation for a lot of this. There were people before him, Stockenhauser, but he kind of almost popularized in his weirdness, whereas some of the earlier ones, people like 12-tone serialists, were really academic and nobody liked their music. It was ugly to listen to, and it was very cerebral, but that was just, yeah. Whereas John Cage created thought pieces, like somebody sitting down at the piano for 4 minutes and 32 seconds, is it? 33, yes. 33 seconds, I got it. That's it. Yeah, in silence. And the whole sound is what the audience makes. That is, a lot of it's conceptual in that way. But other parts are like treating musical instruments, like a piano, for example, with materials that make it sound other than the traditional instrument sounds, and making it into a percussive instrument, like in this case, or doing that with any musical instrument. to make it sound other than what it's typically considered in classical music. So that's another piece that came in. And then there was it's like electronic music started coming in at that time. So they were creating sounds that we'd never heard before. They didn't exist in nature. So
Yes.
that was another piece. Now, of course, today, I mean, that's like that's mainstream, right?
Yes.
But back then it wasn't. It had been recordings of traditional instruments. Even electric guitar still sounded like a guitar,
Right.
maybe with a little bit of a different kind of tonality. But this was stuff that was like made with synthesizers that didn't have even
A keyboard.
like a keyboard. I mean, just knobs.
Just knobs, exactly. Knobs and cables.
Yeah, and plugging in circuits, to
Yes.
make this and that happen. So it was very engineered and mathematical and all this kind of stuff. So it was very different than our traditional, either popular music, folk music, jazz, or classical. It was something different. That's why they call it new music. And a lot of people said, this isn't music. This is noise. This is like, they couldn't stand it. In fact, some of them it was so obnoxious for a lot of people because but on the other hand, there were some pieces that just provoked a lot as well. The audience was provoked in the John Cage's, for example. So this kind of stuff was weaving into my classical orientation. And at the same time, I started making films, whereas the soundtracks were like, whatever you want to do. I mean, you gotta make it work for whatever your intended audience is. And that's, I think, a primary focal point of how I became a sound designer is I can do my own thing, and I've done a lot of my own thing where I don't have to worry about an audience. But when, especially when you're getting paid as a director or a sound designer or a musician, whatever, it's just usually how you follow a script, or at least a mission statement to go with a team to do something. And that's what I learned how to do. And that's another part of my life.
Gotcha. Now, once you start making movies, you use the phrase sound designer. And I think people have maybe seen that in the credits, right? And they're like, oh, what's that? And how do you distinguish a sound designer from like a composer?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And you'll get lots of different answers, I'm sure, from different people, because sound designer has different meanings. And there are sound designers for theater where you have all the creation of the sound effects that the theater is doing and ambience. You have sound designers who create things like for transformers that make a robot that didn't have any sounds and it's all digital into a living creature. And the sound design is something that's very unique to that specific thing of putting all these sounds together to design it like a robot. And then there's the definition of sound design being like a supervising sound editor, which is the actual union notation of the person who's basically heading the sound department, everything to do with the sound outside of music. So music composition and performance is usually parallel to the sound department, but then they have sound music editors to integrate it, and that's where they come together.
Gotcha.
My definition of sound design that I use is encompassing all of that, including the music. So as I am a musician, I consider it equal importance to integrate, hopefully from the very beginning of the project, but most often, somewhere in post-production, and hopefully not for the first time on the sound mixing stage, because that can be disappointing or disastrous if they wait until then. Gotcha.
I remember watching a video of a scene in Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and it's towards the end of the movie. It's kind of a climax. Poe Dameron is flying his X-Wing fighter into this battle, and blast, and then this big climactic explosion happens, and they kind of broke it down into, here's the video, here's the sound and here's the music. And it was the first time I had ever seen it broken into like these layers the way it was. And so they played it just the video, then they added just the sounds, and then they added the music. And it just showed you, the listener, what you've taken for granted the whole time, because a video can be so visually stimulating that you consciously miss the impact of what's happening in the sound and the music. And yet, you know better than anybody that there's a very conscious purpose, and that is impacting the experience of the audience member just as much as what's going into their eyeballs.
Yeah, I call us the sound ninjas. we get in there with a lot of impact without people even knowing.
Brilliant. Yeah. Can you kind of talk to that a little bit? Because I think people kind of take for granted how influential sound is on their mood, on their thoughts, on their feelings.
Sure. Yeah. The neuroscience of sound and how it's processed is distinctly different from the visual input. Our eyes take in that information and it goes to the optic nerve, it goes right to the frontal cortex, the visual cortex, which is right next to associated with our kind of conscious awareness and logical mind and self-awareness as well. And so that is the visual route, and the sound route is very different. It goes from the ears to the back of the skull through the limbic system, which is really kind of the seat of the soul, the seat of the emotions, the seat of unconscious, primitive, instinctual processing, and so the sound actually can give us all kinds of feelings much more directly than the visuals, neurologically. So that's a kind of a basic difference there.
That's really powerful. I almost, I think of it, it's funny, I just used the word I think, because a lot of times I will say I feel, just kind of like conceptualizing that in my head, that, you know, my eyes are kind of this conduit of rational, you know, analysis, and then my ears are this conduit of more emotional impact and analysis, and they're kind of they're like a bicycle built for two. Like each one has a role, and they're very distinct from the other. But point being that you can kind of poke people emotionally more effectively with sound than with picture, and vice versa. Poke them intellectually more with picture than with sound. Am I kind of summing that up? Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yes, I would say very much. It's not a black and white thing at all, but it has that tendency, and especially since we don't know sound the same way we know visuals. There's a psychoacoustic model that I developed called the sound spheres. And this is how I perceive and have shared now with the world our consciousness about sound and how it relates to the visual. And these are what you and I experience every day, all day long. I've adapted this to creating scripts and sound design scenes. So I'll take you through why I'm talking about that. Is that we start with the first sphere, I think, which is all the internal sounds that we're not hearing somebody else's sounds, but we hear all day long the mental chatter. We may hear a song that we're really got that thing going inside of our head. We may be imagining something that's going to happen in the future, or a dream, whatever. It is all something that's the I think sphere. And in movies, we actually can go inside and become like, that could be our avatar, and we're hearing the voice of that person inside. So we actually create a conduit to the I think sphere in movies sometimes. Then we have the I am. I'm speaking right now. I'm coughing. I'm breathing. I'm doing whatever my heart is beating. All these are the sounds that I am doing. I am creating with my own energy. Next is I touch, which is like in film Foley work. It's how do we impact the world with our energy? And if I knock on the desk, you hear that sound, but it's not my body. It's my interaction of my body with the wood. Then we have I see, which is like you're seeing me in a video screen with my mouth moving. So you're associating like on-screen sound, we call it, in sync, if it's a movie. And if you don't see it, and I turn around and, you know, my voice is now going off that way and you don't see my voice, but you can imagine it's me. Well, I know, you know that was me. Even if I turned around and you couldn't see my mouth, it's still, I know it's off-screen sound. So the last one is, I don't know. What the F was that? Those are the sounds where we cannot identify the source. We maybe think we know what it is, but it turns out it's not that. And often it provokes action, like turning your head just to see what's over there. You know, that is what an I don't know sound can do in storytelling. But it has to do then with this visual thing, back to why we were saying how important the visual is for our emotions to be kind of settled. Oh, I know what that is. But if you hear a sound and you don't know what it is, it gets you emotionally, especially in horror films. That's where we really use punch it.
Yes. Yes, that's really great. I'm thinking a lot of the relaxation techniques that I use with clients to help them reduce their stress is music based. And the reason for that is that the music creates a little bit of an audio buffer between what I would call the accidental and the incidental sounds of their environment and their present moment experience, right? Because if you're trying to kind of go deep, go inward, and suddenly there's an I don't know sound that comes into your ears, you're thrown back out into the world, and your primitive, nervous system is assessing whether or not that I don't know sound, whether it's a threat. And it needs to categorize that sound quickly into threat, no threat. And that's all it takes to take you out of your meditation. Just that quick little thing. Unless you train yourself to, with software, like when I mean software, meaning before you begin your meditation, you invite all sound to be safe. And you kind of try to preemptively deal with those sounds, because like the trash truck may come by and you're automatically like, it's going to be fine. I'll hear that sound. I won't have to assess it. I know it's going to be safe. But yet the auditory system is old and it's primitive and it is hardwired to protect us. So you hear the rustle in the grass back on the, savanna, snake or no snake, tiger, no tiger. It is a hardwired thing, right? So that I don't know is that's a great button that you can really, manipulate to affect.
It's a really strong turning point in a film story as well. And you can see films that use it all the time, and you don't really recognize it until like, oh, you've isolated, that's what's going on. That's the I don't know sphere. And your avatar of the protagonist on the screen is living it with you, and they're going, oh no, and there's, Quiet Places was built specifically around that story. That film was about any sound that you make is going to bring on the bad guys. So
let me tell you, I went nowhere near that movie. I saw the trailer for that with my family, and I was like, that's one that I can miss because I'll have nightmares forever after that.
Right. You're such a sensitive being.
Well, totally. I mean, especially sound, what I mean? Like as a music therapist, like
I know. I get it. I totally understand.
All sound and all music is in HD in my head. I cannot, just like,
Well, speaking of which, I just want to share when you talk about music and sound like that, I am like that too. I have synesthesia.
Yes.
Do you also
Yes.
have synesthesia?
I don't, but briefly describe it.
It is the process of the experience of seeing sounds or hearing images.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in my case, you can have it with taste, you can have it with all kinds of things, people
Yes.
with numbers, but for me, I'll hear a piece of music and I'll see a 3 or 4 dimensional object, basically a 3-dimensional moving, dancing lights and colors through time. And it will just unfold like naturally for me, like there's this thing. And a few times I've been able to actually take that from my head into film. And it's kind of like the opening of Fantasia,
Right. Great example.
All those colors and movements. So that happens to me in one way. And the other is like, I'll see something like patterns visually, and I'll hear a sound that correlates to it. And maybe a whole piece of music even. And that's what actually happens to me now when I read music on a staff. I'm hearing it in my head. So that is a synesthetic experience that I recognize. This was not only happening because I had played those things before and I experienced and was just remembering.
Right.
I was sight reading
other
music I'd never seen before and listening to it by looking at the sheet. And a lot of people can do that. I mean, it's not an unusual thing, but that is synesthesia, where you are able to translate and transform one thing into another, one sense input into another awareness, let's say.
So let's talk about let's kind of the moving through your career in being a musician and then being a sound designer, and then you start. You're currently the CEO. Did you start iQsonics, or like how? Tell me, like tell us about that part of the journey.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Okay.
When, why, how, and then what that's led to today.
Yeah. Let's see. There were a few threads that came into my life. One was the didgeridoo. And I was introduced to the didgeridoo about 20 years ago. I'd been given one as a gift from my parents who were in Australia. They brought back a traditional didgeridoo made out of eucalyptus.
Brilliant.
And I tried playing it because I've been playing clarinet for decades, and also playing flute, Jethro Tull inspired. And I couldn't make a sound on it. I was so frustrated. I said, oh well, I guess I just kind of just said, well, I guess I can play these wind instruments, but not that one. Okay. So I just kind of put it there, and it's very beautiful, and it sits in my living room, and I could see it. And then a few years later, a friend of mine lent me his didgeridoo, and I played it instantly. It was like, oh my God, I didn't realize that they're so different in one or another. And I was instantly playing the didgeridoo, and then took lessons from a master, and now have been playing for about 20 years. And what I found with the didgeridoo is that it wasn't about necessarily performance. It was about a vibration that I shared with whoever was listening, but I was experiencing this vibration. It's a very, very physical instrument.
Yes.
Not just being able to breathe and then do circular breathing and all that, but the vibration that happens inside the tube vibrates my own body and my own everything. And then I was playing with other people who were playing didgeridoo as well. So we would be didging each other, and we would play, all the interesting beat frequencies and everything else that was happening with, going into an enclosed space and reverberating into the corners, and like, oh my God, it was a really engulfing, amazing experience. I would use like a djembe drum and put it down on the floor and have somebody lie with their head at the open end of the djembe, and I would dig into the head of the djembe. And this would vibrate down with both the drum and my dig playing into their head. And, I would play with another dig player that would be working on someone's body that needed some energy for whatever transformative work we were doing. And the two diges would basically triangulate the sound waves, kind of like a little bit like a fuzzy laser beam, into the body. So they would be phasing the sound in different organs internally. So that was the kind of stuff that I was discovering to do, and eventually and continued to be in a sound healing circle that we've been meeting once or twice a month for about 20 years in Topanga. And we work on a very spiritual basis, meaning that it's very intuitive. It's not about performance. It's about listening. It's about sometimes letting silence be the healer. Silence can be as much of a healer as vibration. And we work with very, very large drums, singing bowls, other kinds of noisemakers and voices, along with the didgeridoo. And so that work really informed me about working with spirit, and I also use my clarinet and my flute when it's called for.
Yes.
But sometimes I'm not called, and that's okay too, because I just hold the circle.
There you go.
And so that was a very different trajectory in terms of being with sound as a healing energy. And I have to rewind back to the 70s, because I actually practiced healing with an Aikido master in the 70s, where I worked with energy that was kind of like, you could call it prana or chi, or a little bit like Reiki, if you've heard of Reiki. It's a lot of it is not even touching the person, but energy coming through the hands, and different frequencies, different kind of relationship to frequency, vibrations, that would be very supportive of those in need. I just put it that way. I studied for quite a while with this, ultimately was certified in many different massage forms as well, and practiced professionally and became a teacher. But I never used sound in that modality. It was very, very much part of the ambience. We might use sound just as a kind of a relaxing field to be working in. But it was really only with Dare, which is the name of the healing circle. The origin is from Zimbabwe, Africa. Dare means community, and it's the community healing process. So that I continue to work with, although during the pandemic, our in-person healing circles have been
understandably.
We've been doing it with Zoom, and we just don't get the same vibe.
Yes.
Really, yeah. But this moved me kind of parallel with my film career. And by the way, just insert, I wrote a book called Sound Design, the Expressive Power of Music, Voice and Sound Effects in Cinema, and that came out in 2001. And I've been teaching for 20 years in college and professional levels around that. So along with that, I decided that really I wanted to teach more people about that, and to reach young people who now have their own cell phone and their own YouTube channel or TikTok or whatever it is. They can be their own filmmakers. I wanted to reach them. So I knew that they weren't going to read my book or take my webinars or necessarily get into college, go to my film classes, but they do play games. So I started making games based in audio principles and design and the way the neuroscience works, but also the way the fun works with games. And without going into too many details about all those games, it brought me to where I'm at right now, which is the CEO of the edtech M-Health company called iQsonics. And our tagline is audio and music for brain health. And so that's where I am at today, is working on a program and launching it to the world called Sing and Speak for Kids.
Yes. Tell me more about who that's for and how it helps them.
This is for children and their whole families who are speech delayed. And some of them have been with disabilities, special needs like autism or Down syndrome. Others are kids who have been growing up in a bilingual family that perhaps English was not their first language, and now they're going to school with other kids and they are a little behind with that delay. And what we're doing is incorporating a neurologic music therapy that's called developmental speech language training through music. And that's been around for about 20 years, described and in the literature and by some of those who are very well known, like Michael Tout. You know Michael.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the first ones to really identify this. And one of his students named Hyung Lim, who has a PhD in music therapy and is a clinic at Oral Roberts University at Tulsa, Oklahoma. She did her thesis on this and studied with 50 children with autism between the age of 3 to 5 using this technique, and showed a marked improvement when music was part of the training versus just speech or no training at all for these kids to begin speaking. So we've partnered up. She's my director of science, and we've incorporated this into an online music-based game called Sing and Speak for Kids.com. You can go there. It's with the 4 kids. And we've been 6.5 years in development. We've been funded by the U.S. Department of Education and did a clinical trial and are just now publishing the results in Child Language Teaching and Therapy Journal. So it's a peer-reviewed journal. We are officially evidence-based now.
Da, da, da.
Yay, we got it. And we are moving forward with that, continuing with Children's Hospital of Orange County, which is doing a study with us that is with NIH called Music and Health. It's the first time that NIH is funding projects this year for music and health. So we've just applied for a 5-year study with this, with not just with kids with autism, but also working with families who are Latinos and Koreans, working specifically to help the parents become engaged and trained and proficient and advocates for this. So we're bringing it out into the community in a big way. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, I can go into many more details, but that's where we're at today.
That's super exciting. And I'm curious, like, was there a point where it was like, kids, like, I want to really, point my attention at this challenge?
Kids thing seems to be burbling up in me for decades, actually. The most successful and well-known films that I've made have been for kids. I got a lot of awards in the 1970s for a short film called Little Red Riding Hood, Balinese organ adaptation, which I based on the Balinese mask dance, where I learned also the wooden mask carving and did stop motion photography of that carving. And it's for kids, it's the archetypal fairy tale thing. And then my first feature film that I directed was also for kids. It's called Super Xuxa Against the Bad Vibes. It was done in Brazil with the biggest TV star in Brazil. in 1988, and they had the 30-year anniversary. The fans are now in their 30s, and they're interviewing us about how it informed their lives. It was like a Wizard of Oz film that. So I made an impact there too. So it was about kids way back then, and I just really I have 2 grown sons, but I've always enjoyed the energy of children and their beautiful curiosity and innocence and creativity and craziness and like, let's do stuff. And so I'm very attracted to that age range and being in service. And I think that what I'm doing now is going to be broadened also much more than just for special needs, which I think is a beautiful, needed thing. But I'm really excited about the potential of what I'm doing to reach all kids. And we have, I say we, my partner has a grandchild who's 3 years old, and he's so precocious. I mean, he talks about pomegranates and you know what I'm thinking? I mean, he's very cerebral and like out there. So it turns out that our program is one of his favorite games. So it is just for every kid. I think that this could really entertain and educate, etc. But more than that, we're looking to engage the whole family as well. And we're have a patented design for user-generated songs, which is really my next big step. And for me as a creator, it's like, teach him how to fish.
Yeah, totally. That's really neat. And so that's like a trailer for part 2, right? Like,
yeah. Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Outstanding. Well, and where can people go online to find out more about?
Well, the name of the game is Sing and Speak for Kids, and the website is singandspeakforkids.com. That's 4 with the number 4. And it's easy to find, and we're just launching commercially. It's been free for all this time, and it's still always going to be free for professionals to use anytime. The subscription model will be $9.99 a month with 1 week free trial, so they can see if it works, and if it doesn't, they don't have to pay.
Great.
So yeah, we're launching also in the institutional B2B space to regional centers, school districts, hospitals, clinics, all of that. For us, I think are really our main target there, but it's available for anybody to sign up right online. Just
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll put the URL in the show notes as well for everybody. So, well, David, I just thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. It was great spending time with you today on Reduce Your Stress. Thanks so much for checking out this episode of Reduce Your Stress with Tim Ringgold. I've got a couple of resources for you, which you can find in the show notes or you can listen to right here. So check it out. If you enjoy the sound of my voice and you enjoy the sound of my guitar, imagine them put together. Go to sonicrecovery.com and take your very own relaxation vacation, where I take you out of the stress of the present moment and back in time to a time when you felt happy, healthy, safe, and sober, and then walk you through that memory so you can bring back those feelings into the challenges you're facing today. So go check that out. It's at sonicrecovery.com. If you're a healthcare worker in recovery, check out the Music in Recovery Self-Care Guide for healthcare professionals that I created just for you. That's at hcp.sonicrecovery.com. And if you're a healthcare worker and you'd like more information about how to help your patients use music, you can check out the Music Medicine Guide that I created just for you at musicmedicineguide.com. Lastly, if you enjoyed the pod and you haven't done it yet, would you just take a minute to rate and review it? It really only takes about 60 seconds, believe it or not, and it would go a long way to help us make more people know just how good this pod is, particularly for healthcare workers and their stress. Thanks again. See you next time.